they're not mostly still around when they're in their 50s and 60s still making work. I mean, there are exceptions to that, of course, but as photographers or writers or painters or whatever we are, you know, you hope that your work becomes fuller and evolves over the years. And so you have to believe that. You know, I always get asked in interviews, they say, well, can photography change the world? And I think, oh, give me a break. You know, do you ask dustmen if they change the world? I mean, some people change the world, teachers change the world, and nurses change the world, and but the reason they ask that is because the answer is yes, photography can change the world. Not individually. There are instances where photographs have changed the world, it changed the course of the Vietnam War or whatever, but generally speaking, what it does is it helps us share other people's points of view. And the more that we can share other people's points of view, the more we understand each other, the more we come together, and if we come together, we can change the world. So I do think that making work about the society we live in now is critically important, and yes, it can change the world. So the work I'm making now, it might be very different to the approach that I had 30 years ago, but I'm still kind of engaging with the same concerns that I had when I first took to photography in the first place. But crucially, I'm never making work to kind of prove some kind of theory or ideology. My work doesn't provide answers, it's not the point. The point is I have questions and I'm making work to try and understand, and I hope as I try and understand it, it helps other people join the conversation. And it's those questions that are the primary ingredient in any project. And those questions come from a lifetime of reading and thinking and looking and traveling and talking to people and listening to people. So lesson number 3, read voraciously all the time. You'll never ever be short of things to make work about. In fact, funnily enough, I came across this the other day, which I absolutely loved. And I just moved house recently, and the very first thing I did was build bookshelves. And so when we're making work from our own experience and our own perspective, what we end up doing, my friend Stuart Friedman says to me, we end up photographing ourselves. And he doesn't mean, of course, he doesn't mean literally photographing ourselves. Don't get me started on the sort of inward-looking projects that have grown up in recent years, projects that, you know, sometimes can be dangerously self-indulgent or boring to most viewers. But what Stuart means is that we photograph the world from within the context of our own life experience. And that's what we need to do. That's what we need to really practice and cultivate. You know, Sally Mann put it in her new book. It's a lovely book. If you've seen Sally Mann's new book, Artwork, it's very well worth getting and reading and talking about the artistic process. She says the art we make is inevitably autobiographical. The accretion of interpretation and embellishment that has at its core our own personal experience. So no matter how hard I try, how much I can empathise with the people I photograph, I will always be making work from the perspective of someone who has been socialised and brought up and lived as a white Western European man. You know, I can't help that. But that's why I want to see work made by other people. That's why I have the books. I'm not interested in narrow self-reflection. I'm interested in, you know, how people see the world. You might be 23, or you might be gay, or you might be straight, or you might be black or white, or non-binary, or overweight, or vegetarian, or right-wing, or non-conformist, or neurodiverse, or northern. And I'm not saying you shouldn't make work about those things, but what I want to see is I'm not interested in your personal experience of being those things. I'm interested in your view of the world from your perspective of being any or all of those things. You know, the lens is on the front of the camera. We've got Dorothea hang up there. Of course, we've got Dorothea hang up there because for me, the lens is on the front. It points that way. It looks out on the world, and it's a gratuitous excuse for me to show my favourite Dorothea Lange picture, which is the White Angel breadline in San Francisco in 1933. Or my other favourite picture of hers, it shows she had a sense of humour and a delight in life, as well as a conscience and compassion. And I know that Dorothea Lange took the most famous picture ever, and we all need to know what that is without talking about it. But for me, and I stress it's only for me, the camera is a tool for looking outward and engaging with the world. And there are brilliant photographers that have turned the camera on themselves. but it only really works when the resulting pictures have a universality or an honesty about them to transcend the personal. Think of Nan Goldin or Latoya Ruby Fraser or Graham McIndoe or a million others we could all think of. But what they have something really powerful to say about society and something way beyond their own personal experience. It was built in their personal experience, but it taught us about society. And so that's why I have the books. I've got bookshelves full of people's other perspectives than my own. And that's why I'm here talking to you guys today. I want to see your work. I want to hear about your concerns and your passions. How do who you are, how does that influence the way the world exists for you? What do you care about? How do you empathise with people? And it feels to me with so much work about the self these days, and this will be for the people that are older in the room, that Thatcher and Reagan will be rubbing their hands with people making all this individualistic work. She said there's no such thing as society, and I don't buy that. I didn't buy it then, and I don't buy it now. And I grew up in the 1980s, and it was a really politicised time, and it influenced the work I made, and it influenced my worldview. But you guys are starting out in a time that's equally fractious, maybe even more dangerous than it was then. So there's absolutely no shortage of stuff to make work about, and it's really vital that people are out there making it. So make work about politics, or about beauty, or about the environment, or about housing, or about immigration, or surfing, or dogs, or fashion, or football, or student life, whatever. It doesn't matter what you make work about, but make it from your own experience. Have a look. I don't know if many of you know this. I'm just throwing up a couple of books here. Notion of Family by Latoya Ruby Fraser. She started this work when she was at university. In fact, I think she may have started at high school, and it's an extraordinary piece of work that is very personal about her and her family, but it's not actually about that. It's about the sort of deindustrialization of the American Rust Belt, and it's a phenomenal piece of work. And her Belgian coal mining work is called, I can't remember what it's called, and from the coal tips a tree will rise. It's a really brilliant example of how this young black American woman from the Rust Belt made work in disused mining towns in Belgium and found some kind of human connection that meant that she could understand them and tell their stories in a way that made sense to all of us. And I don't suppose many of you I know that Dave hasn't, so other people will, but you're going to have a collection of books like I have at the moment. I've built it up over many, many years, but you have got a library here, and use it. Devour everything you can find in that library. And if they haven't got what you're looking for, go and join the council library. The local council library is, they still exist, and they're brilliant, and the interlibrary loan scheme is phenomenal. Years ago, I saw Alex Soth's Sleeping by Mississippi, an exhibition in Liverpool. It's the first time it was shown outside the UK. And I think, God, that's really amazing. And then years later, I was still thinking about picking, I must buy that book. So I went online to try and buy this book. And it's like 1,800 quid or something. I can't buy that. So I went to my local library, and they said, oh yeah, we'll get one for you. There's one at Stirling University. We'll send it down. We'll have it here on Thursday. It's going to cost you £2.50. So for £2.50, I spent a month with this book. And now you can buy it because it's reissued. But it's really important, so go make work about libraries, actually. Candida Huffer did, and that's a great book about libraries, but it's very different. I've wanted to do a project about libraries for years, and I've not actually done it yet, so you can have that one. If anybody wants to do it, go and do a project about libraries. And there's something really interesting to be said about society and about community and how we kind of come together if we look at libraries. The next project I'm going to talk about really is Bank Top. And this is work that was made in response to the BBC describing Blackburn as the most segregated town in Britain. And you can see, I'm not from a South Asian background. And I don't claim to know the life experiences of people in Blackburn that are, but what I can say is that from my own worldview, that I want to have no part in this divisive way of viewing society, what the BBC did to Blackburn. The culture wars are not going to be fought in my name. I drove down from Bristol yesterday, and the St George's flags are all the way along the road, they're on the bridges and all the rest of it. Make work about that. In fact, funnily enough, it made me think, I did a little project called Flag Day a few years ago, this was after Brexit. And I'd read something that Arundhati Roy had written in her book, My Seditious Heart, where she said, governments first use flags to shrink wrap people's minds and smother real thought, and then as ceremonial shrouds to bury the willing dead. Go and make work about these bloody flags that are everywhere. And because it's not just, I don't want to see a picture of the flags in a newspaper tomorrow, but 10 years from now, we're going to look back on that and think, so what was that? That was the start of something. Why were all those flags there? It was either the point at which we realised we didn't want to live in a passive state, or it was the start of us going down a very slippery slope that people felt this ability to display their racism on bridges. So I was in Blackburn, I was making this work, and I was asking questions, and I wanted to understand, and I wanted to try and find out how people in Blackburn felt about being labelled in this way. And so over about 18 months, I spoke to people, and I listened to people, and I made these portraits. And of course, I'm making the work there as a middle-aged white guy, just trying to get my head around something. What else can I do? I'm not there to say, I'm coming to represent you, or I'm coming to give you a voice. It's not that at all. So don't ever catch yourself saying you're representing anybody else. You're going to find out and to try and dispel, or it's not even trying to dispel it, but you end up dispelling narratives, I think. Because actually, if you go and find someone putting a St. George's cross on a flagpole and speak to them, you don't need to point out that they're racist. They will tell you. What I'm interested in is, I went back to Blackburn afterwards, and they did say that they felt represented and they felt heard, and all those things. It's very gratifying to do that, but that's not the reason for making the work in the first place. The work was really done to present a counter-narrative to what the BBC was looking forward, or what UKIP at the time, or the Brexit Party, or Reform, or the National Front, or whatever they call themselves these days. It's basically just to say, okay, we're going to see that shit that you're putting out there, and we're going to make work about something else, so you have to stand up and be counted. I did see that Starmer actually used the word yesterday, racism, and called it out, so hopefully it'll go somewhere. But if you are making work about people, it comes with a responsibility. And all the people I photographed, I actually spoke to at great length before I finished. I was working with a big old 1080 plate camera, so it's a slow process. So that's lesson, what we're up to, lesson number 4, speak to people. So many photographers I see now, they're running around taking pictures or sneaking them. Go and ask people. There's a lovely quote, another one I absolutely live by, and I've tried to substantiate that it's Eleanor Roosevelt that said it, and I'm not sure because I did speak to someone at the Roosevelt Foundation last year, and they said it doesn't sound like the kind of thing Eleanor, but it sounds like the thing Eleanor would say, but she wouldn't have used these words. And she says, what people really need is a damn good listening to. And it feels like that's what photography is about, is go speak to people, find out what it is, what concerns them, and let's make work about that. So those conversations just led the work to be much more wide-ranging. It wasn't just a set of portraits. It became about immigration and social policy and deindustrialization and globalization and contemporary and colonial foreign policy. And it kind of had all that to it. And it led me to taking pictures like this about, this is the old textile mill, one of the old textile mills, and the whole story goes way back to sort of colonial India in the 1700s and 1800s. And so that's why I hope the work became more nuanced and more weighty than what the BBC did when they dived into town for a couple of days after, to find evidence of a theory that they dreamed up at some editorial meeting in London. Oh, Blackburn's a racist place, let's go there and make work about that. And the film is extraordinary they made, with no concern of what the people in Blackburn thought about it. And again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, I'm just going to whiz through a few of these pictures. I think, very kindly, Falmouth University have bought a copy of this book, so it's in the library. Hot foot it down to the library, you can see it there. But when I made the work, the first place I showed it was in Blackburn, in the community in which it was made. And then it went on to have a kind of life of its own because it won the Sony Awards, and I exhibited it as a double header with Thatcher's Children. So that both of those projects were shown together. And those two projects are both very political, and they're both made in the north of England, and I hope they're there to challenge the status quo and to question the way we organise society and sort of question who gets to decide how we live and who gets to decide whose stories get told. But like any, I often sort of joke about protest singers, but I'm not just a protest singer. I do love songs too. So I did this piece of work at the same time. Actually, this was running kind of concurrently. I did some work about women in the fishing industry, and it's a much more celebratory piece. And it goes right back to the very origins of documentary photography. Because in 1843, the very first social documentary photographs made anywhere in the world were pictures of women in the fishing industry, fishwives they were called at the time, in New Haven, just outside Edinburgh. So I went to St Andrews University and I was looking at the original calotype prints and doing this research. Again, I don't want to sort of dwell on this, but you can see all this stuff on my website if you're interested. And the astute ones amongst you will see the Paul Strand references in here. And then that work was published as a sort of, this was the very first thing that I published as a kind of monograph. And it was exhibited quite widely and toured around for a while. But after those 3 bodies of work, Factory Children, Fisher Women and Bank Top, and I'd done the 16 project that some of you have probably spoken about, and smaller projects like Saturday School and the homeless thing that I showed you that did audio recordings with homeless people. And I was starting to make some new work. And to quote Sally Mann again, I often quote Sally Mann, it's really important to be underway with your new project before you finish the one you're working on. I think I'm lucky. I think that sort of one idea leads on to another idea, and I'm constantly working on new things. So this is currently what's on my shelves. It's sort of 4 or 5 different things that I'm kind of working on concurrently. And what happens, of course, is it's because I'm not looking for ideas to make projects about. I'm trying to engage with what's happening in society and culture and reading books and talking to people, and then using photography to try and sort of work my way through that. And some of the questions I have end up as being major projects and books and exhibitions, and some of them end up just being short stories and maybe magazine things, some of them just end up on the website. And some fall by the wayside completely. And what my friend Steve McCoy calls failed photo projects. And we have all got folders and folders and folders with like 1 picture or 3 pictures or 5 pictures. So it's a bloody brilliant idea, but it doesn't ever actually go anywhere. Except Steve did, because he did a Cafe Royal book called Failed Photo Project. And speaking of Bristol, actually, anyone who is coming to BOP next weekend, Steve has got the sort of flagship show of the Martin Parr Foundation during BOP. So it opens on Thursday, a week on Thursday, I think. So if anyone's there and you want to speak to Steve, he'll be around that weekend. He's very, very interesting photographer. But anyway, after those projects and the kind of weightiness of them and the pandemic and Trump and the sort of chaos of modern politics and us being kind of driven into these ideological silos by grifters, and I'm thinking, well, I've got to get out of this. I've got to find a way of making new pieces of work that are not necessarily so overtly political as Santa's Children, but in a way is my response to the world we're living in now. And so I'm trying to make sense of the world, and I'm trying to think about how we've been manipulated into these polarized extremes. And I could have made work about social media or whatever, but